Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cocktail Hour at Time of the Writer 2021. I'd like to welcome you to this session entitled Feminism in Writing, A Path to Self-Realization and Empowerment. And before I do anything else, I'd like to acknowledge our partners and funders, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the National Department of Arts and Culture, the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Arts and Culture, the French Institute of South Africa, the STAND Foundation, the Foundation for Human Rights, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the Amazwi Museum for South African Literature, and the media partner in Visa Journal for African Writing, as well as the technical partner Hear My Voice. We have 5 panelists on this hour-long panel, so I'm going to quickly introduce them and then hand the floor over to them with mainly a small interjection here and there. If anybody has questions, you're welcome to pose them on the Q&A or on the chat function. And if you have comments, etc., feel free to leave those as well. We hope you enjoy this session. I'm certainly looking forward to interacting with you all. The first participant we have up, it's a very multinational panel. The first participant we have up is Abi Dare, who is the author of The Girl with the Louding Voice, which I read last year, actually, and thought it was one of my most brilliant reads of the year. It was a New York Times bestseller. Abi grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and went on to study law. She has an MSc in International Project Management from my university, which is Glasgow, Caledonian, and an MA in Writing from the University of London. She lives in the UK with her husband and 2 daughters, who inspired her to write this debut novel, which I really urge you to read if you haven't read it. Our second panelist is Lethokuhle Msimang, and she's a South African poet and writer from KwaZulu-Natal. She has a master's in creative writing from Rhodes University. Her poems have appeared in New Coin Poetry, Grocot's Mail, and several other journals, etc. And she is also the founder of the South African Oral History Project, presently focused on the documentation of the Delville Wood Memorial and the role of South African Native Labour Corps. Her most recent efforts are towards completing a book of linked short stories, Tales of the Orange Time of Day. And I actually read this one online, Letu, which I really enjoyed. It was a very unusual read. I've also heard you perform some of your spoken word poetry at the Market Theatre, including the one called A Prayer, I think it was, last year during the lockdown. Our third participant is Oksana Zabuzhko. She is one of Ukraine's most widely published and translated authors. A philosophy graduate of Kiev University, she obtained her PhD in 1987 and has been a research associate at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. She's also lectured in the US on Ukrainian culture and has worked as a columnist for some of Ukraine's major journals. Her 1996 novel, The Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex, was lauded as the most influential Ukrainian book for the 15 years of independence and was on the bestseller list for 10 years. Followed by the epic The Museum of Abandoned Secrets. And this is really a long book, but a page-turningly brilliant one. Just as riveting is something I've started reading very, very recently, a collection of short stories called Your Ad Could Go Here. Oksana charts women's lives and the tumultuous history of the Ukraine. But there's much, much more to her writing. It's very rich, it's deep, it's playful, it's lyrical at times. And she's also vice president of Ukrainian Pen. Our fourth panelist is Shafinaaz Hassim. She's the award-winning South African author, poet, and sociologist. Her works include the novels Sophia and the Economics of Love and Happiness, which deal with the themes of domestic violence and human trafficking, respectively, and a series of children's books featuring the feisty young Nisa Kamar, as well as anthologies of poetry, short stories, and some nonfiction. Her nonfiction works include Daughters Are Diamonds, Honor, Shame, and Seclusion, A South African Perspective, and Memoirs for Kenya. She completed her Master of Arts in Social Science at the University of the Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg, and she has presented seminars in various universities, both in South Africa and abroad. She's also lectured at both the University of KZN in Natal and the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Carice Anderson is our fifth and final participant. Her recently published book, Intelligence Isn't Enough, A Black Professional's Guide to Thriving in the Workplace, includes her own story and advice from 30 Black leaders whom she knows and admires. She's also a personal branding facilitator and founder and chief people officer of Adore Hair and Beauty, a one-stop shop for Black women and girls' natural hair care needs. She's passionate about entrepreneurship, has been a regular contributor to magazines such as Destiny Magazine, and she's a member of the Healthy Hair Gurus, a group of bloggers and writers devoted to sharing healthy hair tips with women. She has a Bachelor of Science in Marketing and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Prior to moving to South Africa in 2011, she worked in human capital consulting. And in South Africa, she has served as the program manager for McKinsey Leadership. She's an avid lover of spiritual books, traveling, spas, chocolate, and laughter. So with that, welcome everybody. It's such an amazing panel, such a diversity of views, such a diverse body of work and very rich body of work. I'm really honored to have you all here and I'm looking forward to the discussion. So to begin with, I'm basically going to throw that title out there and ask you all to comment briefly, each to comment briefly in turn on it. Feminism and Writing, A Path to Self-Actualization and Empowerment. Shall we start? Shall we go back to front in the order in which I introduced you and start with Carice, because she has very recently published a book.
Sure. Oh, Ayesha, you're on mute. I don't know if you're still talking.
Okay, I think I muted a bit too early, Carice, but please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when I saw the title of the panel, I did start thinking, you know, how does this really connect to my book? Because obviously my book is a career advice book for Black professionals, but I do think even if you're not Black, you can get a lot of value out of what I've shared in the book. But in terms of, you know, feminism, I thought about what is the definition of feminism, right? It is the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, right? And when I started thinking about self-realization, that's all about fulfilling one's potential, you know, really maxing oneself out. And then I thought about empowerment, right? You know, people feeling as though they have the agency to be able to direct and chart their own path. And I thought, how do these concepts really relate to my book? I mean, I will say, you know, I did on purpose, right? I mean, I use mostly feminine pronouns in my book, you know, because I think about when I was growing up, you know, it was always masculine pronouns when you were talking about leadership or business. And I have purposely throughout my book tried to I'd say probably 90% of my references are to female leaders. I also made sure, you know, I interviewed of the 30 leaders, I interviewed the gender mix is probably 50-50. So I also made sure I got a lot of, you know, perspectives from women leaders who are super successful from all kinds of industries. And I also talk about in my book some of the messages we get as women that impact how we show up in the workspace. I think a lot of times, I mean, even for myself, I was raised, you know, in the US, but I was raised in a part of the US where women are taught to be docile and to be more subservient and to just constantly take one for the team. And I realized a lot in my career, I also did the same thing. And that does not always serve us well, right? And I think I also, you know, right now I'm a senior principal at a global organizational strategy consulting firm called Korn Ferry. And we do women's leadership development programs. And we often ask our participants, what are some of the messages you heard growing up about what you could do with your life? You know, and a lot of it was, well, you're going to be responsible for the kids and you can't make more money than your husband and you can't be more successful than him. And, you know, you're responsible for taking care of the home. So I also hope that, you know, through my book, people will, women and men, will understand and kind of examine and challenge some of the messages that we've gotten about the roles that women have to play, not only in the workspace, but also at home. And for men to really think about how can they use their privilege to open up spaces for women, and how women, we just need to challenge some of these ideas as well.
Okay, great, thank you. That brings me to really an intersection with all of the work of this panel. Shafinaaz, Oksana, the little I've seen of Lethokuhle's, as well as, of course, Abi's fantastically brilliant debut novel. I'm so excited about it. Shafinaaz, do you wish to comment? I know that's really been a theme of your work, both nonfiction and fiction, over the past decade or so.
Thank you, Ayesha. I'm fangirling on this panel already because I know that I've got on my to-be-read list all of your works. It's wonderful to share the space, and especially because of the topic and you know, the passion around which we write the topic. So when you talk of creating a space where we can interrogate through our works, deepening the conversation in order to create spaces of egalitarianism, in order to undo the violence of the patriarchy in different spaces, and what it means, you know, to write what it means to be a woman in the 21st century, placed in any country in the world, placed within traditional spaces and beyond it, and understanding what that means. You know, also in interrogating social issues like gender-based violence, human trafficking, you know, how women are configured in the spaces of domestic labor, prostitution, and that sort of thing. These are the themes that come through in my work, and what I felt was that breaking beyond the academy and using the vehicle of fiction allowed me to deepen that conversation with my readership, but it also allowed me the freedom and the power to say more in different ways. And like I said, not only just to deepen the conversation, but to interrogate what we need and how we can find solutions together, by putting the conversation out there, by actually writing the difficult stories and the violence that women face in various spaces, because poverty is a form of violence, femicide is a form of violence, and by encouraging the conversation towards bigger solutions, greater solutions. There are some things that the vehicle of fiction allows that the academy still allows one a certain amount of conservatism, and maybe you are hamstrung in a certain way. So I'm glad for being able to interrogate both the social concerns of human trafficking or gender-based violence, and also being able to open the conversation to younger readers through the Nisa Kamar series, to allow people to say, but you know, we have the agency, and it's about time that we can actually take things up and make a difference in little and big ways. And writing does allow that, because if we're not able to uncover some of these issues, then how do you self-realize, how do you self-actualize when self-deprecating behaviors are still prevalent amongst us in societies, and not just in traditional spaces, but in the postmodern spaces that exist around us as well.
Thanks so much, Shafinaaz. Oksana, I know that these very themes are some of the ones you explore in your debut novel, now quite an old novel, Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex. By the way, people, that is not a Ukrainian Kama Sutra, okay? It is a love story, but it's a love story set in very turbulent political times where the implications for gender and feminism are also thoroughly explored by Oksana. Oksana, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ayesha. Thanks for this wonderful representation, and thanks for the invitation, because it's really rewarding to be included in such a brilliant constellation of such bright and talented women. And yes, we all kind of share the same story. I'm terrible at brief answers, and I'm notorious with the long sentences. So Ayesha, please stop me. You know, please follow the timing. Yeah, because in fact I have two stories related, you know, to the title of our panel that immediately both of them resonated in my mind when I read this title. And one of them, yes, deals with the field work in Ukrainian sex, the novel that did change a lot in the Ukrainian literature and is sometimes called a visit card of the new Ukrainian literature of the independence period. Yes, it is precisely the novel which forced me to my own feminist awareness, or rather it was the success, the scandal raised with this novel that made me somehow baptized me into feminism, whatever it means. Because that was the period 1996, the 90s, when the newly born Ukraine's feminist movement, when the newly born Ukraine's feminist movement needed a book to prove that women do have their own voices, and that this novel has been immediately described by critics as the Bible of Ukrainian feminism. No one was asking for my opinion. Yes, fieldwork in Ukrainian sex, the Bible of Ukrainian feminism, whatever it means. And for a year, I've been through the gauntlet of the most outrageous criticism. It's one of these cases when you wake up famous or infamous or whatever. And it was really terrible. It could have been terrible, very much reminding the witch hunting. Because yes, I was claimed a witch and lots of other things just for using the language of female body experience to discuss the issues that were never discussed before, like collective trauma, like you know, the heritage of the past and all these other things which were never discussed in terms of female body. My actually support, my empowerment in this situation was an avalanche of letters from my women readers. Their age ranging from the early 20s to the late 60s, and all of them claiming the same. Thank you very much. This is my story. Thank you very much. This is something that happened to me, and it reads as if you were sitting in my kitchen and I were pouring my heart to you, and so on and so forth. And it really took me aback at first, because prior to that, never was I aware to what extent half of the nation has been silenced. And the fact that so many women recognized, well, thousands and thousands of women were identifying themselves with the protagonist of my story. Well, that's exactly, dismuting. That was my power. That was what was giving me, the sense that I'm doing something very much legitimate, and no matter what they are saying, yes, giving a voice to the silenced half of the nation. Well, that's something that you may describe as feminism in a way, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think I would have been interested in women. I mean, I am interested in women in all my writings more than in men, just because even if I were born a man, and I think I'm very privileged to have been born a woman as a writer. because men were writing about themselves for ages, while women are still underexplored in literature and culture as species.
Yes,
We still don't know ourselves. So
I hear that very clearly, and I think it's especially so in the so-called global south, which I include the Ukraine and other former Soviet bloc countries in. Lethokuhle has actually addressed some of this concept of trauma to the body and the female body and how the female body is used in some of her work. And I may be paraphrasing here, Lethokuhle, but I recall a line from one of your works. I think it was where you describe a meeting with a father, of a protagonist with a father, and that line stuck in my head for a long time. Something to the effect that I feel a sheet of steel rub itself over my wounds. It's a very evocative phrase, and I think it gives a really good idea of the lyricism of your writing. So would you like to address the topic, taking it from there?
Thank you very much. I'm very flattered that you remembered that line. I think it was, I feel a sheet of steel wrap itself over my wounds. And I think I was always one of those people that was very reluctant to call myself a feminist growing up. And I think it had everything to do with the fact that I had trouble with definition. As I'm sure a lot of women do, because we are so victimized by our definition. And it was, and actually something that Oksana said resonated, because it's actually how I became more confident in calling myself a feminist. It was realizing that my experience was a collective one. It wasn't that I was crazy. It wasn't that something was wrong with me or I was lesser than. It was that I was a victim of something that was actually affecting most women. But like most people in the oppressed class, we tend to focus more on our individual experiences rather than our collective experience, because we are given so little power and agency as a collective. And so we just focus on advancing ourselves. And I think in that same light, my experience as a woman kind of mirrored my experience as a Black person as well, a lot of the time. Because in both cases, there was so little advancement that one could get within their own group. And you just started to just focus on the self. And I think that intense focus on the self is what informed me as a poet. It's how I became a poet. It's that turning inward. But becoming a feminist, I would say, was that realizing this shared experience that I was having with other women. And I wrote this book I self-published this book of poems called Hubris. And I just compiled all the poetry I'd started writing from 21 up to the age of, say, 27. And I noticed that there was a running theme, which I believe you mentioned, which spoke to objectification, and how from a very early age, I had experienced myself being observed. And it was at an age where I was trying to find definition, trying to define who I was. And yet I was already being defined by how I was being looked at. And to an extent, there was something enjoyable about the status of a maiden. And at the same time, it was like a very strange dichotomy of it came with enjoying the admiration you get from other people, understanding its fickleness, that it would fade, but also noticing how often it put me in compromising situations, but being unable to let go of that status because of the small bits of admiration it came with. And it made even my transition, as I now transition into a young woman, I'm now 30, it just made it very daunting, because I thought, wow, I'm losing my main currency, my desirability. And then I realized I really need to find a new source of commodity. And as I started to investigate what made me valuable outside of my desirability, I realized that actually desiring to be desired is actually a very limiting status. It's actually more than anything, it just riddles you with fear. and it makes you afraid of definition, and it inhibits your ability to express yourself. And I find that my voice as a poet as well has become something more pronounced, a little less apologetic, because I'm not afraid of being undesired. And so I guess that's a brief introduction to me. I'll hand over back to you.
So much. Thank you so much, Lethokuhle. That segues very nicely into Abi's work, which, just to give you a teaser, really is very, very unusual in that the protagonist is a semi-literate young woman in Nigeria. And it charts her journey to self-actualization in many respects. So the language changes. I am fascinated by the way the language changes in this novel. I think I need to go reread it. I read it in July or August last year during the lockdown. You know, my book club had bought it, and then it didn't get to my turn. We were in lockdown, so I bought an e-version, and I think I need to revisit it. But Abi, you speak to some of these very same themes that Lethokuhle has been exploring, as well as, of course, bringing in such things as polygamy, child marriage, the support of women for women in many respects, etc. So if you'd like to address the topic coming from that perspective, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. I think it's such a great honor to be amongst all of you. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful panel here. And, you know, like Shafinaaz said, my to-be-read list has just grown. I think for me, writing The Girl with the Louding Voice, that's the title of my book. I went into that book not thinking about feminism or anything. For me, it was really about the girl that had often been overlooked. So we know generally that the girl child is seen as, you know, not as valued in many societies as the male child. But I was looking at the girl child that was born into extreme poverty, that couldn't speak very good English. And that was important for me because I felt that there were a lot of stories out there about girls that can speak English and want to do this and do that. But what about girls that are not very educated and have been denied this opportunity? What about them? What about their voices? It matters, right? There are over 130 million girls out of school today. And I felt it was important to tell her story. But as I started to tell her story, it was important for me to also show that behind this girl that you think doesn't speak good English or that doesn't speak good English is a wealth of intelligence, a wealth of brilliance that has been covered up because of what she's been denied, because her voice has been silenced, hence the title. And this is a girl that does not want to be silenced. And as I trod her journey through the book, she began to see through her own lens other women like her who were educated and were born into wealth, but were still experiencing something similar to what she was experiencing. So patriarchy it was slightly different in terms of class, but she could see that even the wealthy people did suffer some form of patriarchy. So she saw that as a young girl and sort of charting that territory of her journey through to when she hopefully finds her voice. And her voice for her is the ability to get an education. And so as I was writing the book, I focused on, you know, stories around patriarchy, like I talked about, a bit of domestic violence, child marriage, things that young girls go through, things that girls that are not even as young as her go through, and just having her feel that pain and tell her journey through her substandard English, so to speak, and seeing that hold a lot of water in the society that she's born into. I thought it was important for me. And in terms of how her voice, her language changes in the story, like you said, I think for me, it was just the fact that she had been speaking a certain way most of her life, but she had come in contact with books and had been more educated. And so it was important to sense that change. But it was also important for me to show that it was her own growing up, her coming to realization of herself. And it came to realizing that the fact that I cannot speak English doesn't make me less of a woman. Now that I can speak it, I realize that even people that speak in great English also still suffer the same as a woman. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, you know, the issues of feminism or patriarchy, it's universal. It doesn't discriminate in terms of where you were born or the size of your pocket or how well you speak. And I think in writing that book and in future books, I think it's important for me to show that, to show how it affects all of us as women born in different classes, in different societies, and different races. It's still the same battle we're fighting. I think it was important for me to show that way.
Okay, thank you so much, Abi. That's great. Before we take off from there, I just want to note to you all that Ishmael has put the link for purchasing Lethokuhle's book on the chat if anybody in this room is interested on that. So please take a look at the chat and you can find that. My second sort of string of comments, if you will, or hoping for string of comments from you on this panel, is really to ask each of you to, in the case of the novelists, look at one of your protagonists or any character in your novel. Doesn't have to be the main character. Shafinaaz, here I'm thinking particularly of the character in your Economics of Love and Happiness who was a sex worker, a character who was difficult to write because, or who may have been difficult to write, I'm assuming here, because they might be regarded as not being a conventional vehicle for feminism. And in the case of you, Carice, asking you to think of your interviewees, were they amongst your 15 or so women? I'm assuming that about 15 of them were women. You said 50-50. Was there one of them who would not seem on the surface to be a conventional vehicle for feminism, for self-realization, etc., and why that is? Let's try and explore that. I think, you know, we, as somebody said earlier, I think it was Lethokuhle, we tend to have a very sort of fixed ideas of what feminism is or isn't, and yet it's such a fluid concept and has evolved so much over the last 2 decades or so, especially with the influx of writers and commentators and analysts from the global south, especially from Africa and Latin America and Asia and Eastern Europe. So I think it's important to sort of look at what may be somewhat eccentric, non-conventional representations of feminism and self-actualization, self-realization. Lethokuhle, you might want to relate this to one or more of your poems. So I'm going to, again, begin this round with Carice, if you'd like to talk to that, Carice.
I was sitting here thinking about the people that I've interviewed, and I don't necessarily think there are women who are that unconventional. I mean, I guess, and maybe maybe I'm not holding women to these traditional standards. I mean, like one of the ladies I interviewed, her name is Tina Taylor. She is African-American, was, you know, a top executive at General Electric. She was, you know, the CIO for one of their business units globally. She's never been married, doesn't have any children, but I don't necessarily look at that as somebody who's not a feminist, right? I think because I also don't have children, I think women can come in all forms, right? And we don't necessarily have to subscribe to what society says we have to want. And I mean, I think I also, you know, I have another lady, Nomfanelo Magwinshu. She was the COO for the World Cup. I interviewed her. She's a partner at McKinsey. While I think, you know, she's someone that I think is strong and opinionated and really accomplished, but I also think she's somebody who's also fairly traditional, you know, and very, I think, you know, very passionate about her culture. You know what I mean? So I think the women that I've interviewed are all across the board in terms of their family structures, what they've accomplished professionally. You know, I think all of them share a great love for Black people in general, and also just a great love for people in general, and I think especially women. So it's hard for me to pick one and think, you know, somebody that's unconventional, because I think I'm kind of unconventional too, right? And maybe that's why I'm friends with some of those ladies, and that's why I interviewed some of them. But yeah, it's hard for me to pick one that probably fits squarely into the definition that you're talking about.
But I think that's fantastic, Carice. You know, I think so often, you know, the earlier forms of feminism, Western feminism in particular, looked at culture and appreciation of culture as being negative influences on feminism. And it's really interesting that you've brought that element in, because I've seen more and more, you know, I've lectured and done seminars, etc., and especially amongst my students, amongst younger women, I see more and more that, you know, women are insisting that their culture, their culture and their appreciation and living of that culture can exist side by side with their feminism, and they're refuting traditional notions of those cultures being patriarchal or being anti-feminist, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. Shafinaaz, do you want to maybe come in here? I know this is something that you have talked to in your works as well, or you don't have to talk to that particularly. You can address my original question if you want.
So just to annotate, because you spoke about Sabrina from, this is the Economics of Love and Happiness, which deals with human trafficking in South Africa. And Sabrina comes in as somebody who is one of the lead traffickers, but you also see that she leads a middle-class life, and she's very worried and looking after an older sister who was a domestic laborer and who brought her up and made sure that she was educated. And so, when we talk about the need for feminism and identifying what it means to be conventional or unconventional, this kind of discourse starts to break down around being women is not a sort of monolithic thing. Being a feminist is not something that can be sort of strictly defined to a particular discourse either. And so identifying what it is about having both the personal, the political, the private space and the public space, what it means to exist in all of those spaces, defines, it's beyond what the word convention can configure. And so in many ways, Sabrina is, when I did the interviews along the way for the domestic violence work and for the one on human trafficking, even interviewing somebody who identified as her labor being prostitution wasn't, it's not that there's a particular type or that she conforms to somebody that you think exists in the movies or something of that sort. This was a middle class women who made certain choices in order to exist, in order to look after her family and her responsibilities around her. While the interviews weren't specifically as was depicted in the novel, it gave me a sense of and an empathy for the situation that women find themselves in, and the agency or the sort of, you could say, is it being a victim of your situation, or is it really taking the decision to exist in certain spaces because it makes particular sense for that time? So Sabrina is a criminal, but you find yourself empathizing with the choices that she's made based on her situation, and because she has the power of taking control of her life. Whereas when I wrote Sophia back in 2012, Zareen was very much shadowed by her own victimhood and choosing silence and being the abused wife who was happy and glamorized that space for her social and her public kind of image. And so we grapple with these spaces that women exist within in order to maintain a certain status, perhaps, a view, the family honor that we talk about in society, and what are these conventions that both women exist within or consider breaking out of, and to what degree is that even possible? And a quick final note on a non-conventional, what could be a non-conventional person, is in my latest anthology, The Pink Oysters. There's a story called Win or Lose, where written from the male perspective, is about a young boy who is insulted by his father as a young boy who looks after the food truck at a basketball game. And one of the basketball players comes up after the game to order food, and he's been worried that he's not going to see this person or he's not going to meet this person, and his father insults him in front of him, which completely crushes him. And then take to the scene where he's a married man and he's being abused, verbally abused by his spouse for being half a man or stupid or an idiot for making the wrong decisions, and we talk about how trauma down the generations doesn't skip male and female, it doesn't skip men and women, and each of us in society are then able to or unable to process the trauma in specific ways that shows out in perhaps in the choices that are made later on in life. And this is what the themes and the characters that try to carry these themes in my work begin to interrogate in many ways. But it really is not just an interrogation, but a challenge against convention, or what it means. Why do we insist on referring to something as conventional when what is convention anyway? Thank you for that question, Ayesha.
Thank you, Shafinaaz. That was a lovely answer. And again, it's a lovely segue into Oksana's work. I was reading one of her short stories the other day, which has a very non-conventional woman in it. If I'm going to use that word, conventional. So, Oksana, I'm not going to say which story, and I'm going to leave that to you if you want to bring it in. Go ahead, please.
In fact, yeah, thanks for the question. I may repeat the same because I've been thinking, I don't know what is conventional in being either a woman or a feminist. Women are still the great unknown of history. We have not yet fully tried ourselves in all the possible roles as actors on the stage of history. We haven't yet had female versions of Stalin or Hitler, for that matter, and we don't know how women would have behaved in that positions. You know, this female face of totalitarianism, the possible female face of totalitarianism is still underexplored. And yes, you know, writing is also a wave of exploration for me. And this collection of mine that you mentioned, in a way, it covers the subject I just thought about this, you know. So thanks again, you know, because it never occurred to me that in fact it seemingly covers the number of very conventionally women subjects. The first story is about abortion, and the last story is about mother-daughter relationship. Though in fact it's something totally different than that, and it is about some, you know, transformation that a woman character is subjected to in every story. It is some kind of challenge and some kind of I don't know, self-realization. I think Lethokuhle has made a very good point when she said, and it is, you know, so touching to hear this when you are twice older. So touching to hear the young woman who is going to turn 30 and who is now lamenting over her losing her desirability. And you feel, you know, this influx of the mother's tenderness. And yes, this is exactly, you know, the point when you understand it is, yeah, it is the same story every time. And the moment, you know, you lose your fear of being undesirable, yeah, that's the moment when you refuse to be conventional in the terms of the old patriarchy. Yes, it is the moment when you become a mature personality. And this whole book, actually, this collection of stories, yes, it is about relations among women. It is their, you know, I don't know, self-sufficiency, their loss of fear of being unconventional, of discussing things among themselves. Well, I believe no matter how unclear or vague this may sound, well, this is the only way to proceed in the 21st century for all of us.
Okay, Thank you so much, Oksana. I think you and I need to have a separate discussion on Margaret Thatcher and Indira Gandhi as female totalitarian leaders, but we'll leave that for another time.
I'd love to.
I will leave that for another time and go over to Lethokuhle, whom you've just referenced in your comment. So I'm not even going to say anything else, but just go directly to Lethokuhle.
Hi, thank you, Ayesha. And Oksana, I just was so touched by that, because I know that from the transition from a maiden is to the mother. And I'm embracing that transition. So I thank you for that tribute. And you also, I think one of you said something about the condition of a woman being somewhat unknown. We don't know what a female totalitarian would look like. And maybe we know, as you might have mentioned, Ayesha, but that person, that totalitarian figure, is still someone that's in the background of a man. And so she's still very mysterious. And something that really interests me about the female condition is our intuition. And I think when I started to think about gender in two ways, either from a constructionalist point of view, being that gender is a social construct and that, society makes us a woman, we're not born women. I feel that I lean more towards an essentialist perspective, which is that there is a biological difference between us. But the trouble lies not in the difference, but how these differences are appreciated. And I think that a lot of the time, the female intuition is something that I really want to tap into. It's that a priori knowledge, that instinctual understanding that your body is changing. It's the fact that we don't really need, there are fewer initiation ceremonies for women, because a woman's body is an initiation ceremony. We know instantly when we bleed that we're ready to have a child. We know the moment our breasts ache that, they're growing. And so we don't really need to be told that we're becoming a woman. I think that our bodies very much inform us. So there's something very intuitive about a way a woman learns and understands. And I think it's this knowledge that has not been given enough expression. And I see it a lot in female poets, just this ability, this tendency not to need to make sense. It's as if they're writing with the assumption that another woman reading this will intuitively understand. And I think that the more we begin to appreciate this way of understanding, we're going to see very interesting literature come to the surface, because I think a lot of women in the past have tried to write like men. And by that, I mean, try to write in a way that makes sense, because we're not trying to appeal to the female intuition. And so I'm very curious to see what's happening in literature as women write for other women and no longer try to depreciate the way that they understand, like just really speaking from that a priori perspective.
That makes me very, very keen to read your book, and I'm going to go and order it after the session, Lethokuhle, because, and it's also a great, once again, a great flow into Abi's work, which is so unconventional in many respects, as I said earlier, in its use of language, but also in the form of its protagonist, Aduni. So, Abi, I don't know if you want to speak to my original question about some character, or whether you want to take it more open, or to an open discussion. Either way.
Thank you for that. I think I'll focus on the character, because this character is very, very nonconformist. She's expected to be silent by society. She's expected to be silent, A, because she's a girl, gender discrimination, but B, because, hey, you don't speak good English, so you have nothing to bring to the table. But she refuses to be silent, and that puts her in a lot of trouble. Not only does she refuse to be silent, she actually takes her voice and amplifies it everywhere she finds herself. Especially, this is a young girl that doesn't understand, doesn't know what you mean by feminism. She's probably never come across that word before, but it's instinctive to her. It comes to her naturally. She was born a woman or a young girl that wants to stand up for other women, and is able to call out when she sees that there's something going wrong. So, for instance, in one of the scenes, this young girl, this 14-year-old girl, Aduni, becomes a housemaid for a very wealthy, very successful woman who is being abused by her husband. And Aduni sees this, and she tells the woman that literally you're being a fool. And this is a young housemaid who is supposed to be subservient, who is supposed not to say anything. And she challenges this woman who is extremely wealthy and of course seen as higher than she is in that society. And I think that for me was just a good example of, you know, for showing that feminism is not something, like I've said before, that that is confined to where you're born and who you are. For many people, it's part of you. It's intrinsic. It comes to you as soon as you realize that that's what you want to be. And so Adunni is that example of a character that refuses to allow society to put her into a box. She challenges everything, questions everything, and will continue to do so even as she gets the education and uses that to empower herself and to young girls that are coming behind her as well. That's part of why she wants to be who she is, to be able to fight for girls like her, without realizing that actually she's being a feminist. It was quite interesting to explore that as a writer, to have this character channel her journey without essentially saying to myself as an author that you are a feminist. She just had to be who she is as naturally as it came to her. And it was very interesting doing that, and quite eye-opening for me as well, how you can express your characters, and how you as an author can divorce yourself and give your character the ability to recreate things in her own way, in her own voice, and still at the end of the day you still kind of share the same ideologies. It was quite interesting for me to explore that.
Great, thank you so much. It's strange, isn't it, how sometimes your characters, as you envisage them at the beginning, take on personalities you never thought they would.
Absolutely. I mean, she got angrier. I mean, when I started, she was, you know, she'd been through a lot of hardship and she cried a bit. But with every single chapter afterwards, there was a lot of anger. And I don't see that anger coming from me, but then I realized it actually was coming from me. But everything was through this character, and it was everything she did is not what I will do, but she was doing all the things, and the writing came from me. It's bizarre writing fiction, actually.
Yeah, and that she, coming from where she did, didn't regard herself as a feminist, but actually was one in pretty much everything she did and everything she said.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing the end of the session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all to give one more input, very, very short. We literally have about 5 minutes to go. So if you could each, you know, make a final comment, final input of about a minute each, that would be fantastic. Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to go first? I'm not going to prescribe to you what you need to say. Just a sort of roundup of where we've been, because it's been an incredibly rich discussion for just an hour.
I would love to ask a question.
Go ahead, Lethokuhle.
To Abi. I was just very curious about, in the beginning, she described her character as needing, you know, just the relationship between English and being able to speak English, and then feeling that would make her kind of a lady. And I feel like I had a very similar experience when I moved abroad for the first time, and I had the same experience with my accent. I thought that I needed to change my accent in order to be perceived as a woman.
Absolutely. I think that also came from my experience as well. When I came to the UK about over 2 decades ago, I would speak English and there would be a lot of shock. Like, oh my gosh, you speak very good English and you are smart. And I think, and that was why I made that decision. Of course, the girls that I knew growing up that were housemaids did not speak very good English. I wouldn't say they did not speak standard English. They navigated the language in their own way, but you understood them, and it did not in any way diminish their intelligence. And so when I came to writing that book, it was a very conscious decision of mine to have these characters speak this way. And, you know, I was writing into the void, right? I did not know that the book was going to be as well received as it has been. I'm thankful for that. But it was my determination to show that, look, listen, English language, and the character says it's one of the quotes that I hear back from a lot of readers, is the character says English language and how you speak it is not the measure of your intelligence. And that's the truth, because there is a character in the book, another housemaid like her, who was very educated and made some very, very silly decisions. And so it has nothing to do with your level of intelligence. And it was important for me to show that. So this character doesn't speak great English, but is so smart. And her intelligence it's intrinsic, is what comes out of her. It's not about the language she speaks or how well she speaks it. It was important for me to show that.
Amen.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you both. Abi, while you're there, do you want to add anything else as a roundup?
No, I think for me, it's just really what I'm passionate about, which is around the fact that, you know, the girl child, it's something that's, maybe because I'm a mother of 2 daughters, but just, you know, ensuring that the girl child, that her voice is heard, that her voice is not silenced, and that she's given the opportunity to pursue her dreams, to become everything she can become, I think is important for me. I think that's something I will continue to commit my life's work to. I think it's important that's done. I think that's, you know, really just that I wanted to see on top of everything else.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to have a final comment? Go ahead, Oksana.
I might drop a story, just to a very brief story, just to encourage my younger colleagues. Back in 2013, I was receiving Angelus Literary Prize of Central and Eastern Europe for the novel you mentioned, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets. It was in Wrocław. Anyway, so the big prestigious prize. The problem with awards is that after it's announced, everyone goes to the banquet hall and you go to the press conference to give the press conference. And after the press conference, you know, when I was approaching the banquet hall, everyone was already quite happy without me. People were enjoying themselves and quite, you know, agitated. And I heard this high-pitched voice of a leading Polish male critic screaming, "But hey guys, look what is going on. This year, all the important literary prizes all over the globe went to women." And he started to list Nobel Prize, Alice Munro, Booker, Eleanor Catton, Frankfurt Peace Prize, Svetlana Alexievich, she got Nobel Prize 2 years after. Then this regional prizes, so-called regional prizes, we have them in Europe for Nordica for Northern European literatures, went to Sophie Oksanen, Angelus for Central European literature, went to Oksana Zabuzhko. Like, what is going on? And there was a true fear in his voice, and it never occurred to me. I was never seeing the situation this way, and I thought, well, okay, so maybe girls, we already do have more power than we imagine.
And we think. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's a lovely anecdote. Carice and Shafinaaz, do you want to have a final word? Carice,
sure.
go ahead.
I actually put my final word in the chat, but I was just thinking about how to summarize this conversation. But I hope this conversation encourages us all to interrogate our socialization and what we've been told about what it means to be a woman, to be a leader, and to be intelligent, kind of pulling in Abby's book in there. I hope that, and I hope that's for men and women. I hope that we all, you know, examine what we've been told in some of these cultural messages, and not just accept them without thinking about them and challenging them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Carice. Shafinaaz, last word from you? And
so last words, I think it's just been so wonderful to open up this space to exactly the conversation that, you know, that is the subject of this title, because every time I've been watching the screen, I want to give a special shout out to Hear My Voice, who's been handling the tech around and the marketing around all of this, because to see the words Hear My Voice and to be speaking about self-actualization through the activism of writing is precisely what rounds up for me what this panel is about and beyond it as well. So I wish each of you all the best in your writing. And thank you so much, Ayesha, for once again being so fantastic, a critic and an analyst of the important writings out there and keeping your finger on the pulse as always. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. And on that note, I wish all of you the vehicles to have your voices heard as writers, as poets, as authors, as novelists, as bloggers, etc., including those of you who are in the audience here today. I think it's so important that voices are heard. Thank you so much for your participation. It's lovely to have a panel of this nature on a fairly abstract topic speak to issues in such an intimate way. And that's what I've really taken away from this. I hope to interact with all of you individually at some point in the future. And once again, a shout out to the partners, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the National Department of Arts and Culture, the KZN Departments of Arts and Culture, the French Institute of South Africa, the Stand Foundation, the Foundation for Human Rights, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, a Maswi Museum for South African Literature, the media partner Imbiza Journal for African Writing, and the technical partner Hear My Voice, which Shafinaaz has already mentioned, and who have been fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for participating. It's been a rich, deep discussion. And I, for one, am going to request from Time of the Writer a recording of this, because it's given me lots of things to talk about, think about, talk about, and write about. Thank you.